Hey everyone, so today we're going to be changing the brake pads and checking the rotors on this Mercedes Sprinter. So we'll go ahead and take off the wheels. We've already jacked up the vehicle, so now we'll just take off all the lug nuts on it. Now this wheel, if you come into this problem, yeah, this one just came off, but if for some reason it doesn't come off because the hub is rusted, then you'll have to put one of these lug nuts back in, put it back in there with the wheel, and then you just hit the wheel up and down and it will pop out eventually. So this is the assembly. It's a twin piston type caliper setup that slides. It's got glide pins or slide pins on either side. So we'll start by taking off the rubber caps there and there at the top, and you also have to pull out the sensor wiring. So once you remove the two caps, you'll find a hex bolt in there, and that's a 6 mm or 6 millimeter hex that you need. So it's a 6 hex bolt in there. So I like to normally open it by hand first, and then you can use power tools. To keep the bolts safe. Some brake pads will come with new hardware, some might not, just depends on your manufacturer. So you got to take off both top and bottom. If the bolt doesn't come off, then you can use a magnetic tool and then just pull it out that way. You need both the bolts out. Then before you swing the caliper or remove it, you make sure that you remove the brake wear sensor. If it's too difficult, you can always remove the sensor itself, the sensor wiring, and remove it that way. But now that we removed it from here, it'll just come through the caliper over there. So now the next part is we want to swing or push this glide pin back. If you all want to seize, then you'll have problems with that, because I've seen quite a few of these sprinters, they seize up here and then you'll have to use a lot of force, but we'll show you on this one. So we'll just show you the other method as well, how to remove this sensor wiring. So you have to remove the bleed nipple cap. Once you remove that, then you need a E-Torx to remove this bolt over here. So this is a E8 E-Torx. So that's what you need to remove that sensor wiring. If it's all torqued to spec, this shouldn't be difficult to remove at all. So now you can see the sensor wiring is completely free. Now the next part is get your screwdriver in that slot over there and just push the glide pin back, just like that. And you want to do that to the bottom one as well, just like that. So once you release it that way, then you can go ahead and remove the caliper, and make sure you have something to secure the caliper once you remove it, somewhere to store it or something. Here we just got this box, wooden box, and we'll just keep the caliper on top of that. We'll have to push the pistons back, but we'll get to that a bit later. And you'd want to clean up this whole surface and clean up everything. Like I said earlier, sometimes what you'll find is that you check these glide pins. Is very important. They should move in and out. They should move in and out freely. They should not be tight or be bound. So if you look here, for example, look at the brake pads, it's quite even wear, so that's what we want to see. For example, if one of the brake pads had more life or more pad material left on it than the other, then that straight away tells you that there's a problem with the glide pins on the caliper. So that's something very important to check. So now we'll just go ahead and remove the brake pads. Generally the brake pads normally come with new hardware and sensors. So that's how you take that one out. It's just on the caliper carrier, the brake pads. And that's how you take out the rear one. So take note where the sensor was. The sensor is on the outer on these sprinters. So always take note of that for future reference, because that's how the caliper is set up for you to go ahead and slot your wiring through that way. So now we'll go ahead and measure up the discs and then check the specs according to Mercedes, whether they need to be replaced or not. Got a digital vernier caliper, and we're going to use this to measure the disc. This disc has got this rotor has got a lip on it. So this vernier caliper will basically take that into account because it's got that spacing here at the top. So we'll just go ahead and measure that. So you want to measure it at about 5 or 6 points. So as you can see, it's still touching the lip, so the lip is more than 1 mil. So we'll have to take an estimate at multiple points and then decide if the rotor is still usable or not. Generally, if you have a lip off the side, you want to get the rotor machined down, but because these printers have so many choices, you just want to replace your rotor. It's just easier. So from where we left off, we got the specs for the brake rotor. So the minimum thickness is 25 mil. The lip on this is about 1.5. So this one's sitting right in between, but because we're putting new pads, like I said, it doesn't make sense to resurface this rotor, so we're just going to be replacing the complete rotor on both sides. So we're going to be taking off the caliper carrier. So we're just marking that bolt so we know what to torque it back down to. We'll still be using a torque wrench, but it's always good practice to mark them as well. And when you're finished, you can remark them. So on both sides, we just mark them, and it's a 21mm socket that's required to open the carrier. So we generally like to use a long power bar or breaker bar, as some people call it. It just makes opening these bolts a lot easier. And once we open it, that's when we use power tools to finish it off. And notice the bolts have been locked from factory. They have Loctite, so just take note of that as well. So you will need Loctite for this job. So as you can see, this whole hub surface is wet because we've sprayed it down with CRC. So that's a big top tip, I can tell you. Just soak this whole hub down, because over time these rotors rust and then they get seized up onto the hub assembly. So now we'll go ahead and remove the rotor, and in order to do that you need a T30 Torx bit, and we like to use an impact and remove that Torx screw over there. Generally speaking, you need to use an impact here, otherwise you can't strip it, so be careful with this one. You have to use a lot of force and impact it off. Yeah, so be careful with this because you can strip it otherwise. So again, it's a T30. And now what we'll normally have to, you install the lock nut just by a few threads, and then you can head off the old rotor just using a rubber mallet or something similar. Hit from the rear, and now we'll hit from the front, but just be very careful not to damage the ABS sensor over there. So just be careful, not the wheel speed sensor. Using a lubricant of some sort or rust penetrant makes life a lot easier, so that's a big tip we can give you. And as you can see, that's where it rusts on here, so this whole hub assembly will have to be cleaned properly and greased properly, so that the next time around it'll be a lot easier when doing brakes and rotors. So here, as I discussed, we've got all new parts. So we've got brand new Brembo brake discs. So for the 311 CDI or the shorter wheelbase Sprinter. You get a wheelbase one. It utilizes the smaller brake discs as opposed to the 5 series chassis or the 511 or the 519. So that's the Brembo part number over there in case you need it. And this is your minimum thickness, as I was discussing yesterday, 25 mil, and the OD is 300 millimeters. So I've got 2 new brake discs. They're coated, so they'll have to be cleaned before installing, which I'll show you. And I've got these brake pads over here. Like I said, some of them come with hardware, some of them don't. This one comes with everything. So brand new sensors, complete kit of hardware, your Shims rubber boots and new bolts for the caliper, and the part number in case you need it. So this is the part number here, DB1973, universal part number, so you can use that for finding the right brake pads for your application too. And we'll go ahead and install it. And like I said yesterday, we'll have to clean up that hub. So notice that hub, how corroded it is. That whole thing has to be cleaned up before installing the new brake. Problem is the shock boots are ripped on this one, so I'll cover that in another separate video. So this will be part 1, showing you how everything was removed, and I'll cover this removal of the shock boots and the shock absorber. But if in case you wanted the part number while you're here on this video, so that's the part number there for the shock boots. But this is how you replace the shims. I've already put one on this side, so notice this is the OEM one and how it's installed, how the clip sits in there. So this is what the new one looks like. Put it side by side. Notice how there's a gap here at the bottom, so it springs in there. So I'll go ahead and remove the old one. Make sure surfaces are clean here, no rust or anything, or just give that a good clean, which we already have done. And go ahead and slot this in here. And then notice how that goes in there and locks in there, and then this locks in here. So that's what you want, all of this to be locked in there. Now we'll go ahead and grease the caliper, we'll go and grease the pads and put all of that back together. Okay, so now we clean the hub using the Y wheel, and now we are just greasing it. You just have to apply a little bit of grease so you won't get it stuck how it was before. Nicely greased up, and now it's ready for the new rotor. So we've got a caliper spreader tool here, which we'll use to compress the pistons, but I'll show you that shortly. So now we'll clean the brake disc first. So we just got some brake cleaner here, and wearing safety glasses, go ahead and clean everything, front and rear, because it'll have a film of oil to stop it rusting when it's in storage. So this will be the first clean, and then when we install it, we'll re-clean it. With brakes, you have to be very careful, and you have to make sure you're always using clean gloves or non-greasy hands. It's very important. Now we'll go ahead and re-spray it down, and spray the back as well, and then we'll take it on and install it. So we've got the new bolt that holds on the disc. We'll put up a little dab of Loctite and then install it in there. Settings for reference. We'll just standard Loctite 243. You don't have to do this up excessively tight, others you will risk stripping it, so be careful. So we just showed you before how to install the new shims onto the caliper carrier. Now we'll go ahead and Loctite the new bolts. Now this is torque between about 80 to 100 Newton meters. We've already marked it before, so we know exactly what torque to put it back to spec. If you're not sure, just tighten it tight. It lines up with the original factory mark. So we just drained out the brake reservoir using a vacuum pump. As you can see, the level is dropped down quite a bit now. So now we'll go ahead and compress that pistons using this special tool. If you don't have this, you can use a pair of large locking pliers, but the tool is the right way to do it. If your pistons don't compress back easily, that means that the actual pistons could be corroded, and you want to just get your caliper checked if it's serviceable or not. Now notice the level, how it's changed already. Because they're brand new pads and rotors, you want to go ahead and push it all the way back, as you can see here, and that's perfectly all the way back. And now we'll go ahead and install the new bolts, and before that we'll just give the disc one final clean again. We've got the new wear sensor. We'll go ahead and install it. Take note on how it's installed. Just clips in place just like that, and then the wire comes through the caliper. Now how we like to do this, a specific brake grease by Bendix, that's the name of it. What you want to do is just want to put a dab everywhere, and then you spread it out. I just want to put a dab everywhere, and then you can just spread it. So you want to get it in all the gears. You don't want too much, you just want a little bit. So if it's excessive, then I'll just spread it on the rear. Similarly on this side. Just want to get it in there, so you get the idea. Okay, so we'll install the front. Similarly on the rear. So you can do whatever you want. You can either grease the pistons as I did, or you can grease the caliper, the pads, doesn't matter. So the pads greased up and the pistons are greased up. This just stops the squeaking and screeching noises. So now we have to be careful of the brake sensor while installing it. Slot that through in the top. Yep, so that's all installed in there. Is that tool? So these glide pins have already been serviced before, so they're perfectly fine. If yours are not, you'll have to strip the whole thing. So remove the glide pins and re-grease all of them. We'll be torquing this to 27 Newton meters. Make sure you do not over tighten these, as you can strip them easily. And as I showed you before, they already had Loctite applied to them. So that's all torqued, and now we'll install the new dust boots. Make sure the wire slots in neatly and it doesn't short to anywhere. And you can just tighten the e-torques, but it's not done up to a lot of torque because it's just a small little bolt. So that's it. So that's the pads, rotors, all installed. And now you can choose whether you want to bleed it or not. Otherwise, you can put the wheel back in and check your brake fluid level. This one's gone up to about the perfect level, but it will go down once we drive it and bit the brakes in. So then you can just top it up from there.